Kendra Duggar is expected in court this morning.
Yeah, she's facing 8 charges in Arkansas along with her husband, who was already charged.
Imagine Kendra Duggar walking into a prosecutor's office, sitting down across from the state attorney and saying 4 words that could collapse everything the Duggar family has spent decades building. I will tell you everything. That single conversation, if it ever happens, does not just change Joseph Duggar's trial, it ends. And tonight we are going to walk through exactly how that plays out, step by step, legally, personally, and publicly. Because this is not just a courtroom story. This is a story about a 27-year-old woman standing at the most consequential crossroads of her entire life. If you are new here, hit that subscribe button right now and leave a like on this video. This channel has been tracking every development in this case with legal precision, and we are not slowing down. The next few episodes are the most important ones we have done. You do not want to miss a single one. Now let's get into it. Before we can understand what Kendra cooperating actually means, we have to understand what a cooperation agreement is, because most people have a very distorted picture of it from crime dramas and movies. A cooperation agreement, sometimes also called a proffer agreement, is a legally binding arrangement between a defendant and a prosecuting authority. It is not a handshake deal. It is not immunity handed over in a parking garage. It is a negotiated, documented, legally enforceable contract. The defendant agrees to provide truthful, complete, and ongoing information about criminal conduct. And in exchange, the prosecutor agrees to consider that cooperation when making charging and sentencing recommendations. Notice what that does and does not guarantee. It does not guarantee that all charges disappear. It does not guarantee a walk-free outcome. What it guarantees is that the defendant's willingness to tell the truth and help the state build its case will be weighed in their favour at every subsequent decision point: charging, plea negotiations, sentencing recommendations. In cases where the defendant has substantial and valuable information, that cooperation can mean the difference between years in prison and probation. In some cases, it means charges are dismissed entirely. For Kendra Duggar, that framework is not abstract. She is not a passive observer in this legal situation. She has her own charges in Arkansas. She has been separated from her children. She has every legal incentive that exists in the American criminal justice system to sit across from a prosecutor and start talking. The question has never been whether cooperation is available to her. The question is whether she sees it, whether she has been advised clearly enough to understand it, and whether the people around her have any interest in actually using it. That last part is where it gets complicated, because the lawyer currently representing Kendra Duggar is Travis Story. And Travis Story is not just any attorney. He is deeply embedded in the Duggar family's legal and financial network. He is connected to Jim Bob Duggar's interests in ways that go far beyond a standard attorney-client relationship. And that means the person advising Kendra on whether to cooperate against her own husband is a lawyer whose professional and personal loyalties may point in exactly the opposite direction from Kendra's legal interests. Let's hold that thought and come back to it, because it becomes the most important structural detail of this entire cooperation scenario. Right now, let's focus on what Kendra actually knows. And this is where things get genuinely significant, because Kendra Duggar is not someone who was kept at arm's length from the daily realities of that household. She was present. She was living inside it. She was there in 2020, the year of the Florida vacation that sits at the center of Joseph's current charges. She knows who was on that trip. She knows what the family dynamics looked like during that period. She knows what conversations happened inside her marriage about what occurred. She knows what Joseph's behavior looked like around children in other contexts. She has years of direct, first-hand observational knowledge of a man that the prosecution needs to build its case against. But here is what elevates Kendra from a potentially useful witness to a potentially decisive one. It is not the general knowledge of daily life. It is one specific, concrete, physical piece of evidence that she has unique insight into. And it is the detail that, in my view, represents the single most legally explosive piece of information in this entire case. The exterior door locks.
Protecting children. What are you doing?
What were they doing in the interview? What was your son doing something definitely worse?
For anyone who is newer to following this case, let me give you the background quickly. Evidence emerged that the bedroom doors belonging to Kendra and Joseph's children had exterior locks installed on them, locks on the outside of the doors, meaning the locks were designed not to keep someone out, but to keep someone in. Or more specifically, to prevent someone inside the house from accessing those rooms from the outside without the knowledge of whoever held the key. That detail stopped a lot of people cold when it first came out, because exterior bedroom door locks on children's rooms are not a standard home safety feature. They are not something most parents install. They require a decision, they require a purchase, they require installation. They represent a conscious, deliberate choice by someone in that household to create a barrier between those children and whoever might otherwise have access to them. The prosecution's interest in those locks is obvious. They potentially suggest awareness that a threat existed, awareness that children needed to be physically secured from something or someone. And the question that every legal analyst following this case wants answered is the same question. Whose idea were those locks? Who decided they needed to go on those doors? Who made that purchase? Who had them installed? Kendra Duggar knows the answer to that question. If Kendra takes the stand and testifies that she installed those locks, that she made that decision because she was afraid of Joseph, because she had observed or suspected behavior that made her feel her children needed physical protection within their own home, the entire case shifts, not incrementally, fundamentally. First, it corroborates the prosecution's Florida case with direct spousal testimony that connects Joseph's behavior to a broader documented pattern of concern. Second, it transforms Kendra's own legal position. If she was installing locks to protect her children from their father, she was not complicit in endangering them. She was attempting to prevent harm from within a marriage where leaving was not simple and where the institutional pressures keeping her in place were enormous. That distinction between complicity and protective action under duress is exactly the kind of thing that causes prosecutors to reduce or dismiss charges against cooperating witnesses. One question. One answer. The entire case changes shape. Now let's walk through what that courtroom actually looks like, because I want you to visualize this clearly. Joseph Duggar is sitting at the defense table. He has been raised in a faith environment that places enormous emphasis on family loyalty, on covering internal matters internally, on not bringing the family's problems before outside authorities. That is not a judgment, it is a documented, verified feature of the Duggar family's institutional culture, visible across decades of public record. And now the person walking through the courtroom door toward the witness stand is his wife of 8 years.
The mother of his 4 children. The woman who was left behind at the Florida airport while he flew home with his father.
Kendra Duggar is sworn in. She sits down, and every single juror is watching Joseph watch her. Before she says a word, the jury is reading Joseph's face. They are watching whether he looks at her, whether he avoids her eyes, whether his expression shifts, whether his composure holds. Defense attorneys know this. They prepare their clients for it. But there is no preparation that fully neutralizes the visual impact of a wife testifying for the prosecution against her husband in a case involving the safety of their children. The emotional dynamics of that moment are so powerful that experienced trial lawyers will tell you by the time the first question is asked, the jury has already started forming conclusions that cross-examination cannot fully undo. What would the prosecution ask her? They would start with the relationship, establish credibility, establishing her knowledge, establishing the timeline of when she became aware of what. They would move to the Florida trip, who was present, what the daily structure looked like, whether anything unusual occurred that she observed or was told about. They would move to the marriage in the aftermath, what conversations happened, how Joseph characterized what had taken place, what changed in the household following that trip. And then they would get to the locks. The defense cross-examination of Kendra would be one of the most difficult assignments any defense attorney could be handed, because the goals of cross-examination are to undermine the witness's credibility and to suggest alternative explanations for the damaging testimony. How do you undermine the credibility of a wife who is testifying about her direct personal experience of her own marriage? How do you suggest an alternative explanation for exterior locks that she says she installed out of fear? The defense would try. They would explore her own charges as motivation to shade her testimony favorably. They would probe inconsistencies. They would attempt to suggest that cooperation with the prosecution colored her recollection. But every line of attack they run comes with its own risk of making the jury sympathize with Kendra more, not less. The prosecution does not need Kendra's testimony to be flawless. They need it to be credible, consistent, and corroborated by the physical evidence that already exists. And on those 3 metrics, Kendra's potential testimony scores very high. But here is the thing that people watching this from the outside sometimes miss. Cooperating against Joseph is not just a legal decision for Kendra, it is a total life restructuring. It ends the marriage in all practical terms the moment she signs the agreement. It places her and her children in direct legal and financial opposition to Duggar family infrastructure, the same infrastructure that has been funding her legal defense through Travis Story. And that brings us back to the detail I asked you to hold on to earlier. If Kendra is moving toward cooperation against Joseph, Travis Story cannot represent her. That is not a technicality. It is a fundamental rule of legal ethics. An attorney cannot represent a client whose legal interests are now directly adverse to the interests of other people that attorney is connected to. The moment Kendra's cooperation becomes real, Story has a conflict of interest so clear and so significant that he would be required to withdraw from her representation. He would have to file a motion with the court, and that motion would be public record. This is the signal I want you to watch for, not a press conference, not a leaked document, not a social media post. The single most important early indicator that a Kendra cooperation deal is in progress is a Travis Story withdrawal filing in her case. When that document appears in the public court record, it means Kendra has either already had preliminary conversations with the prosecution, or she is moving in that direction fast enough that her current lawyer can no longer ethically continue. Attorney withdrawal filings are not dramatic events by themselves. They are procedural, they are quiet, they are easy to miss if you are not watching the docket closely. But in this specific case, that one filing would tell every informed legal observer watching exactly what is coming next. Watch the docket, not the headlines. The docket. Now let's talk about precedent. Because some people watching this might feel like the scenario we are describing is extraordinary, that spouses do not actually testify against each other in cases like this, that it is too unusual, too dramatic, too much. And I want to address that directly because the evidence does not support that intuition. Spousal cooperation in criminal cases involving is not rare, it happens. It has been documented across numerous high-profile cases involving charges where one parent held more direct culpability than the other. In those cases, prosecutors regularly approach the less culpable parent with cooperation offers precisely because the less culpable parent often has the most intimate knowledge of what the more culpable parent did, knew and said. The cooperation structure in those cases follows a predictable pattern. The cooperating spouse provides a detailed proffer. The prosecution evaluates the new information against existing evidence. Charges against the cooperating spouse are reduced or dismissed. And in exchange, the cooperating spouse provides live testimony. There is another thing those precedents cases tell us that is directly relevant here. In cases where the prosecution already has strong independent evidence, a confession, a forensic interview, a corroborating victim statement, spousal cooperation is not the difference between conviction and acquittal. The prosecution does not need Kendra to convict Joseph if the existing evidence is strong enough to do that on its own. What spousal cooperation changes in a case like that is the calculus around trial. Defense attorneys for a primary defendant whose wife is cooperating against him do not typically take that case all the way to a jury verdict. The combination of existing evidence plus spousal testimony creates a risk profile so unfavorable that the rational response from the defense is to approach the prosecution about a plea deal before Kendra ever sets foot in that courtroom. Kendra's cooperation, if it happens, would almost certainly trigger a last-minute plea negotiation from Joseph's team, not because the prosecution needs it, but because Joseph's defense team would be staring at a worst-case scenario that becomes unacceptably dangerous the moment Kendra is listed as a witness. Now, I want to take a step back from the legal mechanics for a moment because there is a human dimension to this story that I think gets lost sometimes when we get deep into the courtroom strategy. And it matters not just because it is emotionally significant, but because it is directly relevant to understanding why Kendra might or might not choose to take the step we have been describing. Kendra Duggar did not grow up in the Duggar family. She married into it. She was 20 years old when she married Joseph through a courtship system designed by a faith community that has very specific and documented beliefs about the role of women, the sanctity of marriage, the appropriate response to family difficulty, and the institutional preference for handling problems internally rather than through secular legal systems. She was not raised in that structure the way Joseph was. She came into it as a young adult through a process that offers very limited opportunity for the kind of independent legal or personal counsel that most people take for granted. She is now 27 years old. She is separated from her children. She is facing criminal charges in Arkansas. She has watched her husband board a plane with his father while she was left in Florida. And she's represented by a lawyer who may not be giving her advice that is primarily oriented toward her own best outcome. I want to hold that picture next to another one, Anna Duggar. Anna Duggar never cooperated with federal prosecutors in Josh Duggar's case. She had no legal incentive to, she was never charged with anything, and therefore she had nothing to offer that would materially improve her own legal position. She was a voluntary bystander to a legal catastrophe that she watched unfold around her family. And today, Anna Duggar is the wife of a federal convict serving a 12-and-a-half-year sentence, raising 7 children without a father present, waiting for a man who will not be eligible for release until 2034. That is the outcome of loyalty without leverage. Kendra is watching Anna's life in real time. And unlike Anna, Kendra has something Anna never had: her own charges, her own leverage, and her own legal pathway to an outcome that looks nothing like Anna's. The question of whether Kendra recognizes that pathway and whether she is being clearly advised about it by someone whose loyalty is actually to her and not to the Duggar family's institutional interests is one of the most important unanswered questions in this entire case. Because here is the truth that no one in Kendra's current environment may be saying to her plainly enough. The loyalty she extends to Joseph and to his family does not come with any protection for her. Jim Bob Duggar's legal and financial infrastructure has a demonstrated, documented history of prioritizing the Duggar family's institutional survival over the individual welfare of the people connected to it. We saw that in Josh's case. We are seeing it in the structure of representation. In this case, Kendra extending loyalty to that system does not earn her reciprocal protection from it. It just leaves her holding charges, separated from her children, and watching someone else's legal strategy play out around her while she has no independent voice in any of it. The cooperation pathway changes all of that. It gives Kendra a voice, it gives her leverage, it gives her a legal outcome she can control. And most importantly, it gives her a path back to her children that does not depend on Jim Bob Duggar's goodwill or Joseph's legal outcome going in a direction that benefits her. I also want to address something that I know some viewers feel strongly about, which is the question of what this means for Kendra's children specifically, whether a mother cooperating against their father is good or harmful for them in the long run. And I think this is worth engaging with directly. In the short term, cooperation is disruptive. It accelerates the legal dissolution of the family unit. It creates conflict and instability. Those things are real and they matter. But here is the other side of that calculation. The alternative, a mother who stays silent, whose charges are not resolved, who remains legally compromised and potentially separated from her children for an extended period, is also harmful to those children. Children whose mother is facing unresolved criminal charges and who is not present in their daily lives are not in a stable situation. The cooperation pathway, painful as it is also the pathway that most quickly and most clearly resolves Kendra's legal exposure and returns her to a position where she can be a present, legally unburdened parent to those kids. The thing I keep coming back to when I think about Kendra's situation is this: she did not create the circumstances she is in. She did not design the faith community's courtship process that brought her into this marriage at 20. She did not build the Duggar family's institutional structure that now surrounds her legal defense. She did not choose the events that took place in Florida in 2020. She is a 27-year-old woman who has been placed inside a catastrophically complicated legal and personal situation by forces that predated her and that she had very limited power to influence. And the single most important thing she can do for herself, for her children, and arguably for justice in this case, is to find a lawyer whose undivided professional loyalty is to her. And to ask that lawyer one simple question: what is the best deal I can get? And what do I have to offer to get it? The answer to that question may be the most important thing that happens in this entire case. Not the physical evidence, not the forensic interviews, not the closing arguments. The answer to the question that Kendra Duggar asks her lawyer, assuming she ever has a lawyer who is fully and independently on her side, may be what determines how this ends. Let me leave you with this. Every major case that involves institutional cover-up and delayed accountability eventually produces a moment where someone inside the institution decides that their own survival matters more than institutional loyalty. In federal cases, that moment is often when a cooperating witness agreement is signed. In this case, the person with the most to gain from that agreement and the most to offer in exchange for it is Kendra Duggar. Whether she recognizes that, whether she is being advised clearly enough to act on it, and whether she has the independence and the support to follow through, those are the questions that will determine not just the verdict in Joseph Duggar's case, but the shape of Kendra's entire future. The attorney withdrawal filing is the tell. Watch for it. When Travis Story's name disappears from Kendra's case, everything accelerates. That is not the end of the story. It is the beginning of the final chapter. Now, I want to hear from you directly. Do you think Kendra cooperates against Joseph? Comment yes if you think she takes the deal. Comment no if you think she stays loyal. I am going to run a full community poll on this, and I will report the results in the next episode, because your read on this matters, not just as audience engagement, but because the people watching this channel most closely are often the sharpest observers of what this family does and does not do under pressure. Subscribe right now if you have not already, because the next 4 episodes cover the territory that no one else in this space is tracking the way we are. We are going into closing argument strategy, the verdict probability breakdown, the sentencing framework if Joseph is convicted, and most importantly, the one development that happens after the verdict that nobody has publicly predicted yet. That last one is the episode I have been building towards since we started this series. You do not want to arrive at episode 28 without having watched everything that came before it. Hit subscribe, hit the notification bell, and I will see you in the next one.